leaders of France, Germany, Italy and Romania have ended their meeting in Kiev today, assuring the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of firm international support. Visiting Kiev today are the French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi. They were joined later by the Romanian President Klaus Iohannis. All four arrived this morning to Kiev. The leaders of France, Germany and Italy arrived in Ukraine for a joint visit, as a senior Russian official voiced concern that such a move may not help solve the ongoing conflict if the trip was based on what he called a pre-written script. As they visited the town of Irpin, they were shown gutted, burnt-out buildings and the wreckage of a car which Ukraine says was targeted by Russian troops when a mother and children were inside. Irpin, a town at the northeast of the capital, Kiev, was devastated early in the war, where withdrawing Russian forces once left behind bodies littering the streets. The visit had taken weeks to organize, while the three most powerful EU leaders all fended off criticism over positions described as too differential to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Still, the move by the three to travel together held strong symbolism at a pivotal moment. A day before, the EU's Executive Commission is expected to recommend pushing forward with Ukraine's bid to join the bloc, which EU leaders are expected to endorse at a summit next week. While in Irpin, President Emmanuel Macron said massacres and war crimes had been committed in the Ukrainian town and that it would be best to really build fast through partnership with European members. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said Irpin, like Bucha, had become a symbol of terrible and senseless destruction, as innocent lives had been targeted, houses had been destroyed, and an entire city had been destroyed where there was no military infrastructure at all. Joined later by the Romanian President Klaus Iohannis, they engaged in deeper discussion with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. President Zelensky said Russia's invasion amounted to aggression against all of Europe, and that the more weapons Ukraine gets from Western nations, the faster it will be able to liberate its occupied lands. He also talked about the prospect of further sanctions against Moscow. The Kremlin, aware of the visit, had said earlier it hoped leaders would use their visit to Kiev to discuss other subjects than the supply of weapons to Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said in a call with reporters that they should use their time with President Zelensky to take a realistic look at the state of affairs. Now, NATO defense ministers are also meeting for a second day in Brussels to discuss the situation in Ukraine and a Latvian request for more troops 2 weeks before NATO leaders are set to decide the future military lineup on the alliance's eastern flank in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And before the meeting, Latvian Defense Minister Artis Fabriks called for larger forces in the Baltic states and said that any sign of weakness, be it in Ukraine or on NATO territory, would encourage Russia. Estonia and Lithuania support Latvia's position. Now, immediately after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February, NATO dispatched additional troops, ships and jets to the alliance's eastern front, in particular to the Baltics, and placed some 40,000 troops under direct NATO command. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg expressed his support for the security body, increasing its military capabilities on the group's eastern flank.
If we would act correctly in 2014, there would not be 2022. So will we act now correctly in order to avoid the next war? That's a big question. And that basically means that we need a prepositioning of larger armed forces in such countries as the Baltic states. There must be weapons. There must be economic might of the West put behind Ukraine, because Ukraine must win. It's very simple. And Russia must lose. There's no other way out of this.
About a Georgian war in 2008.
Well, joining me now is a foreign affairs commentator, Collins Weke. He's in Brussels. So, Collins, thank you for joining me on the program. And I'm sure that you're watching these meetings going on. Well, first of all, let's talk about the one in Ukraine, where the French president, Emmanuel Macron, the Romanian president, Klaus Lohannis, as well as the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi all attended with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. What do you make of the last-minute rally of support around Ukraine at this time?
Thank you, Amarachi, for having me. Well, the rallying of support has always been there from day one, so we need to get that very clear. So it is a continuation of that policy of the Western Alliance to actually stand very firmly behind Ukraine. You can, however, say that the German Chancellor and the French President have lately been under very heavy criticisms for not making this trip earlier than today. So to that extent, of course, you could actually surmise that there is a bit of domestic political pressure on their part to make the trip. However, looking at the contents of their discussions and the pronouncements that they have made so far, I think it is fair to infer that this is not a meeting or a trip that was hurriedly put together. There are some plans behind it, and ultimately, I believe that the cardinal point to be made here is that the three EU leaders, including Romania, making it 4, actually are continuing that Western Alliance campaign of ensuring that Russia loses and that Ukraine wins this war.
And it's a very interesting dynamic that we're seeing, in the recent times. And the Ukrainian president has called out, the two leaders that you mentioned, Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron, for their support also for Russia. I mean, how do they balance that, with promising the Ukrainian president of their financial support, of military aid and all of that? How do they balance that, with their relations with Russia?
I would want to think that the German Chancellor and the French President are rather being diplomatic in their approach. Now, calling their relationship with Russian President as a show of support, I don't quite think that there is enough evidence to support such assertion. Now, what you could say at best is that they may be playing the good cop and the bad cop, strategy, where they are desirous of keeping an open door with Russia, not to give up completely on Russia, to create the impression, of course, that Russia has in them a negotiating partner. So that ultimately they are looking at the long-term goal, which is to end this war. And indeed, the war is not going to end under the barrels of the gun. It is going to end on a negotiating table. And so, giving the assurances, directly or indirectly to Russia, that there will be a soft landing for him when he decides to, give up the arms, and better giving it up as quickly as possible. They believe that it is something that will encourage him. But of course, the interpretation is different.
Yeah, and I remember the early days, of this Russian invasion of Ukraine. The French President Emmanuel Macron paid a visit to the Russian president. I think this was a few days before the invasion, and he got assurances from the Russian president, of not invading Ukraine, having no intentions of doing that. Of course, that has changed now. But the Russian government is monitoring this meeting going on between the leaders. Earlier they had said, they should focus on other things, than providing weapons, more weapons for Ukraine. Do you think there's a threat in that advice that Russia may be given to these European leaders?
Well, obviously, Russian President Vladimir Putin is not going to be smiling, at the German Chancellor or the French President for this trip that they have made. But I think it will surprise any watcher if indeed the two, EU leaders, France and Germany are expecting a smile from Vladimir Putin because there is enough blame to go around. Like you mentioned, Putin denied up until the last minute that he is planning to invade Ukraine. And even at that, he is still in denial. He hasn't called this a war. He continues to call it officially a special operation. So he is deceiving, the other people. So I don't think this will surprise him. Now, coming to the Russian leaders' request for them to stop supplying arms to Ukraine, well, of course, it's expected to say that because he wants, an easy run over of Ukraine. But short of direct combat with Russia from the NATO alliance, they are actually, fueling this or supporting Ukraine indirectly by the supply of arms. They are left with no other option than to continue along that line. You are probably aware that, just yesterday, a vote of $1 billion, US dollars has been made to Ukraine to support them in purchase of, armored vehicles and the rest of them. So, yeah, it's continuing, and it doesn't look like Russia can do anything about it.
It's interesting, that Russia sees this as a provocation. More weapons for Ukraine, and that $1 billion military assistance the U.S. will be providing, additional military assistance U.S. will be providing for Ukraine. But NATO defense ministers are also meeting where you are, in your city, Brussels. I'm sure that there's a lot of activity going on there. The plan, of course, is, to show some sort of solidarity with Ukraine. And I know that individually, some of these countries have, pledged support, financial and military, towards Ukraine. But how much effort do you think they're making diplomatically to help stop this war?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And you can actually draw a correlation between the NATO activities by way of military support and the position that the German Chancellor and the French President have taken. So, to a very large extent, you can actually assert that the diplomatic channel is held open and alive and kicking via these two leaders by trying to maintain a warm relationship with Russia. Now, that's on the one hand. Now, on the other hand, and tied to the diplomatic side of things, I believe that the Western Alliance have done nothing than support the negotiations that are taking place in neutral grounds, Poland, Hungary, and all of that. Despite the dilly-dallying of the Russian leader, they have, continued to have faith in the efficacy of diplomacy, and they continue to, support the initiative. Well, I think people could look at this, ordinary mortals like you and I could look at this and say, well, there seems to be some sort of a double standard here. How could you be, supporting diplomatic channels, yet you are supplying arms and actually, making some economic enhancement, initiative towards Ukraine? Well, those are two separate matters. The fact of the matter is that the war is ongoing, and in their books, Russia has got to lose and Ukraine would have to win. And one way to do that is to support them militarily and financially until, the guns go silent.
I think it's safe to say at this time that NATO and other EU countries are fighting this war by proxy, by providing those weapons to Ukraine. But the Ukrainian government is trying as hard as it can, to maintain courage, to keep up the courage that the troops have, those who are facing the Russian forces at the forefront. But, a lot of bombardments coming from the Russian forces and from the Russian military. And it's really heartbreaking to see the pictures, the destruction that has happened in Ukraine. And at the end of the day, we'll all sit down and count the losses, the human lives that have been lost, and also the infrastructure that's also been lost. But, Ukraine loses the most in this. So what else can leaders do, to stop this as soon as possible so that, we don't have to count, more than necessary what has been lost in the war?
Yeah, what else they can do is nothing other than, pursuing vigorously and unrelentingly the diplomatic channel, because it is only through that means that this war is going to end. However, like you were aptly captured, Ukraine is under heavy bombardment. Infrastructure is actually being demolished like it's no one's business. The human cost of, the invasion is very, very high. As a matter of fact, Europe has also been very, very, accommodating, because obviously Ukrainians have managed to find their ways into various cities of Europe. So one way that Europe believes that they will actually, scale down on the extent of devastation, infrastructural devastation, is indeed to supply Ukraine the arms that they need to defend themselves, and also to carry out some preemptive, operations, so that in the end, the losses will be, limited, and the rebuilding, which they are already talking about, which is part of, building the hope for Ukraine, will actually be at the, reduced to the barest minimum. But yeah, the toll is high, and the rebuilding will, take care of all of that.
Yeah, and I think probably that's where, the focus should be on now, the rebuilding. Lots of beautiful cities destroyed in Ukraine by Russia, and some on the side of Russia blame Ukraine for what's going on. I've spoken to analysts who say that all of this could have been stopped, really. I mean, it was in Ukraine's hands to stop this war in the first place. Colin Smeke, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining me today on the program.
My pleasure, Amarex. Thank you for having me.
China has always stood on the side of peace and justice over the Ukrainian issue, and independently assessed the situation on the basis of the historical context of the merits of the issue. That's according to Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin earlier today. Now, his remarks come after a U.S. State Department spokesperson said China risked ending up on the wrong side of history over the Ukrainian issue. Wang said that China has always stood on the right side of peace and justice, and lashed out at the United States' incitement to the conflict. According to Wenbin, while the United States broke its commitments and continuously pushed the eastward expansion of Nato that brought Europe to fall into conflict and confrontation again, China actively advocated a concept of common, comprehensive, cooperative and sustainable security, and called for the establishment of a balanced, effective and sustainable European security architecture. While the United States clamored to fight until the last Ukrainian and fueled the crisis or the conflict, China actively urged for peace talks and pointed out that the international community should support Russia and Ukraine to continue talks, not fighting. Military commanders from Japan, the United States and 16 other countries have met near Tokyo for the final day of the Pacific Amphibious Leaders Symposium, which Washington hopes will help forge cooperations between nations that could help it contain China. Around 70 PALS participants visited a naval base and army camp to observe drills and inspect military equipment, including hovercraft and Osprey aircraft carrying troops. U.S. forces in Japan also displayed a high-mobility rocket system, HIMARS, similar to ones the Pentagon is supplying Ukraine to help it fight off Russian invasion forces that Moscow says are there on a special operation. The participants, including military commanders from Southeast Asia, such as Thailand and Indonesia, as well as Britain and France, have sent naval patrols to Asia in recent years. And Pacific Island nations, including Fiji and the Maldives, also sent representatives. The four-day event started on Monday. It comes as Tokyo looks to take on a bigger regional security role to counter China, North Korea, and Russia.
There is no nation that can do it all by themselves. Every one of us has a piece to offer to operations in the Pacific and beyond. So I would offer that, like the toast we gave the other night, our operations will be built on trust and the opportunities to work together.
And I am sure that verse 22 disseminates a powerful message that we do not allow unilateral changes to the status quo by force, and will maintain a rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific.
The World Trade Organization has announced the extension of its 12th ministerial conference by one day in order to facilitate outcomes on the main issues under discussion. WTO members have reportedly reached a consensus on some critical issues, but more time is needed to deliver concrete results. Spokesperson Daniel Pruzin mentioned this at a press briefing earlier. Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala on Tuesday called on the organization's members to find convergence on the various issues at stake at the conference, which opened on Sunday in Geneva. Representatives from the WTO's 164 members have discussed key issues such as international agreements on waiving intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines, pandemic response efforts, fishery subsidies, agriculture, food security, and reforms to the WTO and its future work priorities. Global economists shared their views on the meeting's developments in a panel discussion earlier.
The pandemic, with regard to the global food crisis, with regard to the climate crisis. And the determination was there are good prospects for agreements, and that talks should continue. And they are continuing. They're taking place intensively in small groups, bilaterally, all sorts of configurations. And the hope is that by tomorrow afternoon we'll have some outcomes to announce. Well, it's not a make or break moment for the WTO, but there are important global crises that need to be addressed. With regard to the pandemic, with regard to the global food crisis, with regard to the climate crisis. And the WTO doesn't hold the answers or have the ability to resolve these problems. And hopefully the ministers will get together and do something constructive.
They've been working really since the pandemic began on a vaccine waiver. And it's still uncertain whether they'll reach agreement this time. There is also discussion about export restrictions on vaccines and medicines, as well as on food. There are many issues, and it will be good if the WTO can make some progress as kind of a confidence-building measure.
This year, global trade is facing quite a few headwinds, not just high energy price, inflation, and also, geopolitical flashpoint, which resulted in reduced trust. All these issues will be addressed at the meeting.
We have to be humble and have a small achievement in order to gain trust and do a baby step in the right direction. And again, to me, it's climate change. It's about trading of renewable items, about new technologies that should be eased, should be supported, among others, because The climate is not going to wait for us to solve our problems.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's former ethics advisor has quit after being placed in an odious position over a plan that risked breaking the government's ministerial code. Lord Gate, whose role was to advise Johnson on matters relating to the ministerial code of conduct, did not specify what the advice was about, but said an intention to breach the code to suit a political end would have made a mockery of the rules. Previously a top aide to Queen Elizabeth, Gates was Johnson's second ethics advisor to quit in the last 2 years. Media reports suggested he previously considered resigning after Mr. Johnson was fined for attending a party during a COVID-19 national lockdown that he ordered. Checking on the weather now, worshippers in Toledo today, it defied Spain's earliest heat wave in over 40 years and took to the streets to watch Corpus Christi procession. Fervent devotees braved temperatures of up to 39 degrees Celsius to catch a glimpse of a Jesus effigy as it was carried on the shoulders of worshippers in a procession beginning at Toledo's cathedral. Souvenir shop owner Julio Alonso shared a local saying about the heat during the Catholic celebration in the city, saying there are 3 Thursdays that are brighter than the sun: Holy Thursday, Corpus Christi, and Ascension Day. Corpus Christi celebrates the belief in the presence of Jesus Christ in the Holy Communion, bread and wine representing Christ's body and blood, and takes place the Thursday after Trinity Sunday. Well, that heat wave is expected to last until the end of the week, with temperatures surpassing 40 degrees Celsius in many parts of Spain, and night temperatures also unusually high, between 20 degrees Celsius and 25 degrees. Well, Londoners are also braving themselves for even hotter temperatures, at least up to 34 degrees Celsius tomorrow, with the British capital due to be slightly warmer than Athens or Rome as a heat wave sweeps through northern Europe. While Londoners have taken advantage of the unusually warm weather to spend time outside, heat is a reminder to millions that global warming is a looming threat. The Met Office and the UK Health Security Agency has issued a level 3 heat health alert for South East England, London and East England, while a level 1 alert is in place for Northern England. Average temperatures in London in June are generally in the region of 20 degrees Celsius. Now, if the peak materializes, it would make it the hottest day of the year so far in London. In Brazil, police have found human remains in their search for British journalist Dom Phillips and Brazilian indigenous expert Bruno Pereira after suspects confessed to killing them in the Amazon rainforest. The suspect, a fisherman who had clashed with Pereira over his efforts to combat illegal fishing in indigenous territory, led police to a remote burial site where the remains were unearthed, according to Detective Eduardo Fontes. That news marks a grim conclusion to a case that has raised global alarm, hanging over President Jair Bolsonaro at a regional summit and stirring concern in the British Parliament. Phillips was a freelance reporter who has written for The Guardian and The Washington Post. He was doing a research for a book on the trip with Pereira, a former head of Isolated, and recently contacted tribes at Federal Indigenous Affairs Agency, FUNAI. They were in a remote jungle area near the border with Colombia and Peru called the Javari Valley, which is home to the world's largest number of uncontacted indigenous people. That region has been invaded by illegal fishermen, hunters, loggers and miners, and police call it a key route for drug trafficking. Police had previously identified their primary suspect as fisherman Amarildo da Costa, known as Pelado, who was arrested last week on weapons charges. His brother, Oseni da Costa, or Dos Santos, was taken into custody Tuesday night. Public defenders representing the brothers could not immediately be reached for comments by local media. The suspect's family have also denied that they had any role in the men's disappearance. We're delving into Africa now. A nationwide strike by state employees is taking place in Tunisia. The most powerful union in the country called for the stoppage of to protest against the economic policies of President Kais Saied in the latest challenge to his rule. The UGTT union has urged its 1 million members to observe the strike across the country to protest against government's plans for a wage freeze and cuts in subsidies aimed at securing a $4 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund to ease Tunisia's economic crisis. Flights to and from Tunisia are being halted as a result of the industrial action. The union says its motive is not political, but it is bound to be seen as another challenge to President Saied, who has effectively assumed one-man rule for the past year. The UGTTs, in any case, already caught up in a shutdown with the government after it refused to engage in Mr. Saied's plans for a new constitution. The next 48 hours, or 24 hours, beg your pardon, are likely to see the fault lines in Tunisia become even sharper. Well, in South Africa, citizens are marking the 46th anniversary of the youth uprising against apartheid in Soweto in 1976. President Cyril Ramaphosa marked the day at a youth event in Umtata in the Eastern Cape province, where he encouraged his audience to embrace government's efforts to improve the lot of youths in the country. Celebratory events as well as protest marches have marked the day as the country faces double-digit unemployment figures, high crime rates, among other socio-economic challenges. We asked at We Channel Television, asked some young students how they feel about the shape of the nation today as it celebrates.
We are in 2022 and we claim to have been in freedom or whatsoever, but we need to first understand that in 1994, South Africa didn't get freedom as it perceived, but we only got partial political freedom because education is still the same, my brother. Like, we still have schools now that don't have like adequate resources. We still have children who go to school barefoot. We still have children who go to school hungry. We still have children who go to school without uniform.
I would say yes and no. The reason why I would say yes is they fought to get opportunities. We are getting opportunities. Utilizing them, I'm not sure. The point where I would say we have utilized them is I'd like us to be more financially literate and make use of more opportunities to do better for our country. Rather than depending on the government, let us be the government, you know, let us make opportunities amongst ourselves and grow like that.
I think we can just work together, believe in each other, believe in ourselves and grow each other, and yeah, the government will come in to help after that.
I believe that what worked yesterday might not work today, you feel? So because people used to strike and got what they want through striking, it doesn't mean it can still happen, you know, because people have been crying about different things, but still nothing has changed. So we must find a new way to make these people listen. And if they can listen, everyone will be good. And when everyone is good, everyone is safe, everyone is good, everyone has food in their stomach, no one has to go out there and do crazy things to get money.
South Africans speaking on today's Youth Day. Now in the UK, Kevin Spacey strenuously denies allegations of sex offences, according to his lawyer. The Oscar-winning actor made his first appearance at a British court to face charges dating back almost 20 years. Now, Spacey is accused of 5 offences in Britain, 4 counts of sexual assault by touching and a more serious charge of causing a person to engage in penetrative sexual activity without consent. Prosecutors say Spacey forced a man to have oral sex. Spacey, wearing glasses and a light blue suit, was met by a mass of media as it arrived at London's Westminster Magistrates Court, with security guards forced to battle their way through TV crews and photographers. Now inside, he spoke only to confirm his name as Kevin Spacey Fowler and his London address when he appeared in the dock. Spacey showed little emotion during the short hearing.
Step back. Step back. Step back. Step back. Stop pushing against me.
Well, Kevin Spacey is an American actor, so let's turn to our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, who joins us now via Skype audio to talk some more about this. Maria, is this news making, headlines in the United States, especially in the entertainment world? What is Hollywood even saying about this?
You know, Hollywood, I think, is not surprised as to what the outcomes are for this. Obviously, there has been a great focus on sexual assault and sexual charges on Hollywood here in the U.S. recently. Most of it has really been around women, but this obviously is one that is highlighting an issue around sexual assault that has related to men. And so I think that Hollywood is definitely going to continue to challenge actors, and you can see here how this has, I think 10 years ago, we would not have seen this type of news around it, nor would we have seen this type of charges come forth, even though he has been released. And so the question is, once he makes it back to the U.S., what type of work is he going to get? And I think that will be the tell-all sign as to how Hollywood is responding, is going to be based off of what are the roles he will receive next.
Yeah, and he has had, quite the career, hasn't he? He's a really popular actor and really well known in the United States and around the world as well. So this comes as a shock, of course, but nothing more different, from what the other Harvey Weinstein case, which also happened in the United States. If you put them side by side, what's different between the two cases?
Well, one, this is different because you're talking about men. And I think that the other issues were really around what they were saying was a long-standing issue around sexual abuse of women trying to enter the industry, which was heavily dominated by men, especially for those who were directors, producers, and those who kind of allowed or would hire women in that space. And so that was a little bit of a different movement. This here is one that you're talking about sexual assault against men. And at the time, many of these men were younger. And so is it similar from the standpoint of were they trying to enter the industry and being used in this way? Or was this a standalone case where there was sexual assault that had nothing to do with trying to enter the industry? And I think that is, the question is, are there going to be more men that are going to come out that have experienced a type of sexual assault during their time? Obviously this is back in the early 2000s. A couple of them happened in 2013, but most of this was, several years back. So I think, is it going to be as we saw with the women, many women started to come out more and more. I mean, obviously Harvey Weinstein, there were many more women than the 3, and they're saying that potentially 5 here in the case of Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, and the focus has been, or the spotlight has been on Hollywood in recent times, for cases of sexual assault. More people becoming even bolder, to speak their truth regarding this. What does that tell about what's going on in the industry, and how people tend to make it to the top?
I think this is putting a light on whether or not this has been a trend for how people can enter the industry. But I think what it's also doing is allowing the industry to kind of revolutionize and to bring forth a greater playing field for those who are trying to enter the industry that want to do it in a way of integrity, of ethics, of honesty, and really are there because they are passionate and they have skills and talent within the arts. And so I think that is what hopefully we'll see changing around. Obviously, there was the large Me Too movement. And so the Me Too movement has gained quite a bit of support. And the hope is that they will continue to see that movement allowing for greater access, and obviously not access at a expense of someone having to be going under sexual assault and those type of very demeaning and harsh elements and environments.
Yeah, and just for our viewers, Kevin Spacey has been granted an unconditional bail after appearing at the London court on the 4 charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. He's not asked to enter a plea for the alleged offences from 2005 to 2013, but he'll be appearing in court again on July 14th. Now, he does have a family, doesn't he, back in the United States. Any word on how this is impacting on them?
We've not heard of it. And typically in these type of situations, the family stays very private. And we probably will not hear more as to how this will have an impact until after the July 14th trial, where we will see what the actual fate will be. But it's, obviously it's definitely impacting all of those members of his family as they are, obviously going out every day in their everyday lives. And so this will have a emotional impact on them as well. But whether or not their family will separate as a result of this, I think we really will not be able to see until after July the 14th.
Maria, thanks again. And do stay safe, of course. An environmentally conscious Senegal is turning waste to wealth as a means of profit, of course. Hundreds of informal recyclers gather every day at Dakar's main dump site, one of which is Bay Dame Ndiaye, who set aside plastics for recycling companies to pick up.
Baye Dame Ndiaye expertly sifts through pungent heaps of rubbish dumped at the landfill where he grew up outside the Senegalese capital, Dakar. He's setting plastic aside for recycling companies and cuts them into smaller pieces.
I never thought in my life I would end up working here. But when I discovered this job, I found that I enjoyed it more than I could have ever imagined. Other people only see the rubbish they throw away from the houses. But behind it, there's more than rubbish, because it is something we care about.
Hundreds of informal recyclers gather each day as the sun rises over the trash mountains in Mbabese, Dakar's main dump site. The trade has continued to thrive despite the 2020 ban on single-use plastic and government efforts to formalize waste collection. Ndiaye is part of a team of 120 that picks up around 3 tons of plastic per day. It is chopped into smaller pieces, washed and sold to a middleman for 25 CFA francs per kilogram. Companies buy that plastic for between 50 to 75 CFA francs per kilogram and then sell it to plastic producers in Dakar, such as Simpa.
We have an overcapacity of production, so we took this opportunity to buy waste from outside to help reduce pollution in the country and create a circular economy to have a country that is much cleaner. Because unfortunately, it's a bit sad to say, but we see plastic waste everywhere, so we try to bring our contribution to help cut pollution in the country.
He transforms the waste he receives into small plastic balls that he can then reshape, like transforming them into basins. For example, a product that he can easily resell in the surrounding area, but also in other countries in West Africa. In 7 years of work, Ndiaye has become a breadwinner for his family and set enough money aside to breed sheep on the roof of his home. He bulks up their feed with cardboard from the dump, where cattle herders also find food scraps for their animals.
We don't buy the cardboard. Father Diop cuts cardboard at the dump. I get a bag or two from there, and I come and prepare my feed and cardboard mix. Sometimes, what we do is collect polypropylene material and sell it to buy cattle feed.
Ndiaye sells his sheep every year during celebrations to mark the Muslim feast of Eid al-Adha, also known as Tabaski in West Africa.
Burkina Faso's leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, has traveled to Setengya to visit people who survived an attack that reportedly killed over 100 people over the weekend. Soldiers have recovered 79 bodies so far after the attack of the northern Senegal province. At least 100 people were killed and possibly as many as 165 in the attack. It was the deadliest attack in at least a year in the West African country, which is battling an insurgency by groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. There's been no immediate claim of responsibility. Unidentified assailants first attacked a military police post in Setengya, according to a Department of Senegal province, killing 11 gendarmes. According to the army, it said the gendarmes fought back but were outnumbered. 3 security forces said that the military police then withdrew to the regional capital, Dori, to regroup, leaving no one at the security posts when those armed men returned 2 days later and slaughtered dozens of civilians. Britain says it has no plans to leave the European Union Convention on Human Rights, but the Strasbourg court, which enforces it, overstepped its powers in blocking the deportation of asylum seekers to Rwanda. That's according to Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab. The government was thwarted in its attempt to send a handful of migrants on a charter plane more than 4,000 miles to Rwanda on Tuesday, after the European Court of Human Rights stepped in to issue injunctions cancelling the flight. Raab, who's also Britain's Justice Secretary, criticised the Strasbourg-based court for essentially blocking the flight, part of a policy which London says will stem the flow of migrants making dangerous trips across the English Channel from France. He said the flights will take place despite criticism from the United Nations, the leadership of the Church of England, and Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, who's privately described the plan as appalling.
Our plans involve staying within the convention, the European Convention. It is also important the Strasbourg court reflects and stays faithful to its mandate as part of the convention too. It's a two-way street. I don't think it's right that when the High Court at length has considered the issue and decided that there was no grounds for an injunction, the Court of Appeal has backed that verdict up, and there's been no appeal to the Supreme Court. I think that those judicial rulings should be respected.
French luxury brand Yves Saint Laurent demonstrated what they say is a first-of-its-kind in-store experience that uses brain scanning technology to help shoppers choose the perfect perfume based on their emotional response. A tech was unveiled this week at the Viva Technology Conference dedicated to innovation and startups at Port de Versailles Exhibition Center in Paris, France. Visitors to the show were invited to try out the experience at the Yves Saint Laurent Beauté Sensation, with booking slots quickly filling up in the day and for the next day. Firstly, they fill out a touchscreen questionnaire answering questions such as whether they prefer a fragrance close to the smell of a dense forest or a spice market, and how they want the perfume to make them feel. An algorithm then decides on 6 simple accords with a multi-sensor egg-based headset tracking their emotional responses to different scent families and analyzing these to make product recommendations. The experience was created in partnership with US-based bioinformatics company Emotive that develops EEG technology for short, to advance understanding of the human brain. Hieronymus claims that there is a 96% accuracy in terms of fragrance recommendation and consumer satisfaction.
The experiences that we've created for the consumers here at Vivatech, but also for real stores, and it's really a fantastic use of technology, because this scent station is going to be helping consumers be recommended the right fragrance for them based on the measurement of their emotions.
Well, emotions change every day. You need a different perfume then. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.